Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. My name is Alex, and I would like to welcome you to this training session, an introduction to OpenNebula operations. I hope that I'm audible and you can see me and hear me loud and clear. Yep, as it mentioned already in the chat, feel free to drop any questions related to this training during the session so I can answer them after it. Once again, welcome and let us begin. As usual, the session is going to be recorded, so you could check it out later in our official YouTube channel. Right, let's begin by going through the agenda. So, what are we going to cover today? So, today we are going to cover the Sunstone. So, what the Sunstone is, how to access it, how to use it, and so on and so forth. We're talking about the user settings, the ones that matter the most. We are going to touch on the virtual networks and discuss marketplace and apps, virtual machine templates, as well as in the end of the day, we are going to deploy a virtual machine. If you are following along, please make sure that you have access to your OpenNebula deployment. Make sure that nothing is blocking you in case you need to access your environment via the secure shell. But in general, we are going to pretty much be all the time in the graphical web UI. Once again, if any questions, please do let me know. Of course, let's talk about Sunstone. What the Sunstone is and how to access it. So Sunstone is the graphical user interface. It's web-based and it is bundled with OpenNebula. Now, if you've installed your OpenNebula using Mini One, then it's going to listen on the port 80. However, by default, if you are going to install OpenNebula from packages or using the One Deploy tool, then it's going to listen on 2616. So keep it in mind if you've installed your OpenNebula in any other way around. Now, it has the built-in one-time password MFA, so you could secure your account, and it also is the same entry point for administrators as well as the cloud users. The thing is that the view itself, the availability of various sections, it is going to be different, obviously, because administrators require kind of more granular access, while cloud users are enough just having a more limited one. However, it is the same entry point, so you can pretty much use the same URL. Now, as I've mentioned before, if you install it using the Mini One evaluation tool, then you are going to land to Soundstone by just going to the port 80. In any other way, 2616 is the port to go. Now, by default, we have the username called OneAdmin. So OneAdmin is the top tier administrator, pretty much the god mode, pretty much has the keys from the kingdom and can do whatever the user wants. Pretty much unstoppable. And then you have a password. So this is a very important bit. Now, if you will look at the password, where to get it. Now, two things to be aware of. When you install OpenNebula, then the password for the OneAdmin user is going to be generated automatically. If you've installed it using the Mini One, then you are going to have this password outputted after the installation. So if I will navigate to my output, you can see that my password is pretty much password, right? Alternatively, if you forgot how it looks or what you've entered there, then you can easily go to lib1.1 auth and just look inside of it. So this file will be generated by default, and OpenNebula is going to create the one admin user with the following password. Keep that in mind if it happens for you to forgot your password once you've installed. Also, I would keep me logged in. I will check this checkbox so to avoid getting the timeout. Good. A little bit of a loading here and there, and here we are. We are entering the OpenNebula environment. Now that is the admin view because I'm logged in as an admin with the one admin user. I'm navigated to the admin view, which pretty much means that I can access every single piece of OpenNebula, every single corner, and well, I'm technically unstoppable. Now you can switch and go through the views that are available out of the box. Depends on the configuration and the user permissions, you may get a different view, obviously. Now, just click to the view switcher and you have 4 views out of the box. Now, the least saturated or the least privileged is the cloud view. Also, cloud view is going to have a slightly different dashboard. So as you can see, I've just switched to that one, and now you can see the CPU usage of the host, memory of the host, disks, utilization, memory, networks, and CPU of your virtual machines. So then we go to the user's view, which is a little bit more functional. Now, you may say like, hey, is it only a dashboard that differs? No. Let me show you like that. So I'm going back to Cloud User, and on the left, let me expand all available tabs. So virtual machines, virtual machine templates, applications, users. Now, let's have a look how it changes when I'm switching the view from the cloud, which is the least privileged view, to the user's view. The dashboard changed, of course, but also have a look on the left, right? There are more subtabs available under the storage, and then there is also a network section available. Going to the groups admin, you can see that you have even more. And then we're jumping to the admin view. Now you can access pretty much everything, right? So I tend to name it as the soft limiter, right? Because it just affects the Sunstone. If you have access to the command line, then you are going to have access to these parts where you have permissions to access. So it's not limited using some kind of a view. However, it keeps the view clean and decluttered. So if you don't need access to something like, let's say, ACLs, right, the access control lists, if you don't need to access this one, then why should you even have this option, right? So we don't want it to be visible to our regular users, so they don't question what it is and maybe even don't see any, error that they don't have permissions to access something. So keep it in mind. These are the views. Now, the question might be, can I create any views myself? Yes, you can. It's not a rocket science, although I'd like to say it's a command line task. So you would need to create some directories files and edit some of the files using the Linux command line. So that is the way to create this custom views as of right now. Good. So let's go to the user settings and let's talk about what you can have there. So under the user setting, you have multiple tabs, and the most important ones would be definitely the security tab and preferences. So preferences is where you can set the styles of the data, whether it's a card or it's more like a list. Then you can select the theme of the OpenNebula, so either dark or light. And then some other things like language, like the dashboard animations, like also the full screen informations on the data table, as well as select the default endpoint if you're running the multi-tenant OpenNebula, and then the default view if you would like to change that. So if you have multiple views available. Under the security, that's the place where you can uh, change the secure shell public key, as well as create the login tokens, or register the authentication app if you would like to have your login protected using the MFA. Now, secure shell public key is rather important. So, because as a user, when you are going to deploy your virtual machine, you must be able to somehow, right, access your uh, virtual machine. Well, how you can do that? By default, using the secure shell. But then you need to know the username and password. Well, by default, there is no password, right? So you don't compromise yourself using some kind of a weak password. That can be configured, but still, out of the box, it comes without any password. And then you can enroll your public key. So this public key is going to be placed into the authorized keys on the target virtual machine. So whenever you deploy a VM, it is already ready to be accessed from your workstation, your laptop, or any other, let's say maybe an Ansible station if you would like to run some automation playbooks on your target virtual machines. So that is where you can enroll that. Also, it that is the place where you can change your password, right? So that is the place where you can change your password. However, you see that the change password is actually grayed out. Why it's like that? Pretty simple. One admin is the only user if we are speaking of the core authentication, so authentication using the OpenNebula database, not a third-party integration like, for example, LDAP. But one admin is the only user that cannot change a password in Sunstone. So if you'd like to change the password of one admin's user, you need to do it using the command line. I would say it's a security measure to make sure that in case something goes wrong, you have access to the command line, right? To pretty much save yourself. So that's why, and again, be very careful also who can access as the one admin. And one admin is the part of the one admin group. So that is a specific user group right here where you could add more users. But just so you know, one admin is a top tier, right? So that effectively means that once you get those permissions, you are unstoppable and you can do whatever you wish. So keep that in mind and make sure you are trusting the person who is getting added to this one admin group. Otherwise, it may end up not in the way you wish. Cool. Let's cover also the virtual networks. Now, virtual networks in OpenNebula, we do support multiple standards. So the bridge or bridge with security groups, we do support Open vSwitch implementation or Open vSwitch with VXLAN, as well as the simple VLANs and extended VLANs, also known as VXLAN. Right. So that is configurable under the networks, virtual networks. First of all, if you've installed your environment from Mini1, then you have this virtual net created by default. Now, if you've installed it in any other way, then by default, you should not have any virtual network unless you've created it manually. Now, you can either update the existing one or you may also create a new network. So when you click create a new network, the wizard appears. And then you just need to name it somehow, for example, training, right? And select the cluster. You may also skip selecting the cluster because then it's going to be added to the default cluster anyways. But if you know, would like to have a little bit of a control where you place it, then you would like to select this cluster explicitly. Now, then we go to the advanced options, or basically the actual settings of the virtual network. So that's where you define what type of the driver we are going to use. Either we are using bridge or bridge and security groups, or VLAN, also known as .1Q, or VXLAN, or OpenV switches. Now, you may saw a thing called security groups. What it is, well, effectively, that is the host level firewall. So instead of configuring a firewall on your virtual machines to filter out the traffic, you can configure it using the security groups at the host level. So your hypervisor is dropping the traffic, and traffic is not going to reach your virtual machine. Now, if you'd like to use this, you need to go either with bridge and security groups, or .1Q, or VXLAN. So only these three are supporting the security groups. Keep that in mind if you would like to add some extra layer of security on top of your environment. Now, when it comes to, let's say, basic bridged, what else you can do? You can either bound it to a physical device, so it knows how to go outside, or you may configure it as the private host networking, which actually means that you would rather keep this traffic on a specific host, or pretty much on the host itself. Now, there are other options. If you pretty much would like to route your traffic in any other way, then yeah, you can also go with the private host networking. But in general, let's consider like that. Unless this one is ticked, we assume that you would like to have this traffic go outside of your host. Then you must bound it to a specific physical device, for example, ATH0. If you don't, then just click this switch, and then it is going to remain on the host itself. Right. So we've configured the driver. We've identified what are you willing to go with. And now let's switch and talk about the addresses. Right. So what you need to have a pool of addresses. Now, the thing is that you can create a network without the address pool. It's not going to work because you will not be able to assign any address to your virtual network card, but it is possible and doable, right? So yes, you need to create a range if you would like to have a functional network. Now, at this point, what we need to know is that you must decide how would you like your virtual machines to receive an IP address. Would you like it to be static and then distributed and configured by OpenNebula, or you would like to use a third-party DHCP server, right? So that is something that you need to decide. If you would go with third-party DHCP server, you go with the Ethernet range, right? And let's say 10 addresses. So now it's only going to assign the MAC address to your virtual NIC and not going to configure the IPv4. Or you go with IPv4 and then you are going to add the IPv4 so OpenNebula can configure the settings for the network card, right? Again, that's what you need pretty much to decide how you would like to receive these IP addresses. The next is security. That's where you select the security groups. If you are planning to use security groups, avoid using the default one. Why? Well, it's very easy. By default, the default security group is kind of permissive. So it pretty much allows everything in and everything out. And then whatever you configure after that makes no sense because you have the allow uh, allow configured, right? So that is quite important to understand. Good. So then you can configure quality of service if you'd like to somehow control the inbound and outbound traffic. And the last but not least, from the networking perspective, is the context. That's where you place uh, your gateway settings, your DNS settings, and very important, that's where you select the method of assigning the IP addresses. So by default, it is configured that IP addresses are getting assigned by uh, the OpenNebula. So OpenNebula is going to also configure the network card on the inside of VM, right? Now, if you would like to go with DHCP server, like the external DHCP server, you need to select the method DHCP v4, or in case it's v6, then you go and select the DHCP v6. Otherwise, keep it as is, also known as static, based on the context. If for any reason you don't want to configure any IPv4, you can just skip it, right? But in general, that is how you would like to proceed most of the time, either with based on context or DHCP. Right. So I'm going to proceed with the defaults because it's fine in this scenario. Right. So as soon as you click finish, there is the network. And now you can use this network to configure it further, or maybe alter it, or maybe check their current attributes like the bridge, the type, and so on and so forth. Now, another cool feature of the networking is the way how you can reserve an X amount of addresses from the already existing network. So it is going to create a child network, and this child network will inherit all of its parent settings. So for example, we have the VNet, right? We can click reserve, and I can reserve, let's say, 20 IP addresses. I should name it somehow. So let's name it as Alex Webinar. Then I need to select a range because your network can have multiple ranges, right? So select the range. And then if I wish, I can add the first IP address or just leave it as is. And then OpenNebula will take the first IP address from the existing list, right? Cool. So now we've just created one, and you can see that this is the network I can start using. And you also can see that on the network, we right now have 20 IP addresses leased. Good. So if we go to leases, you can see where this IP address belongs or reserved to, right? So right now it's net with the ID 2, right? So that means this network with this ID 2, right? So that is when it comes to these networking. Right. What else you can do? You can reserve a specific IP address if you don't uh, want this IP address to be either consumed by the reservation or consumed by the virtual machine. So just paste it here and press hold IP. Then it's going to appear as the IP that is placed on hold. Good. Now here's the catch with the reservations. In the reservations, what OpenNebula does, it takes the amount of IPs requested, in this case 20, and allocates it from the first IP address that allows to allocate 20 sequential IP addresses. So let's say if I would like to create a reservation um, starting from the IP address, let's say 29 or 28, and then 10 up front, I have two options, right? It's either I'm going to ditch this idea and start with 31, or I need to create two separate address ranges for the reservation, right? So because if I will go ahead and will try to allocate 10 IP addresses starting from 117, 16, 128, or 29, I'll get an error because OpenNebula expects you to give the ability to get those sequential 10 IP addresses. Yeah, but again, it can be workaround. You just add multiple reservations, and that's pretty much it. Good. What else do we have? We have network templates. So you can create a network template and then allow your users to create those virtual networks themselves based on a specific template. So you kind of define all of these settings, and then you are letting the users to create those, to provision those networks in the automated way using the services, or in the manual way. So that is also the ability of OpenNebula. Now, how to create from template? You obviously need to have the template in the first place, and then when you're creating a network, you have two options: create or create from template. As simple as that. Good. Now, let's assume that we have our virtual network set up. And one thing that I would like to adjust right here is I would like to change the gateway, the DNS from this one to, let's say, 111, because I'm running this one in the public cloud, and often they don't like when you install a rogue DNS server. So to avoid any issues with that, I'm going to proceed with having a DNS set to 1111. You could do the same if you wish, or if you okay with that and you install from MiniOne, then proceed with the defaults or as configured. Good. We've configured the virtual network. We have a user. Well, what else we need? Obviously, we need something to deploy, right? And in OpenNebula, we're deploying using the virtual machine templates, and base for these templates is an image. So image is pretty much the snapshot of a disk. An OS, but image also can be an empty data disk, or it might be the disk with the data, right? The source for the pre-built images is the marketplace. You can build your own images, of course, and it's totally fine. But the good thing about the marketplace is that it is configured and already ready to use. So, because what makes an image, the OpenNebula image. The contextualization layer, basically a set of specific scripts that are configured to interact with the OpenNebula environment and get you the virtual machine in the desired state. Like, as the example, configure the networking. Networking is going to be configured using the contextualization package. So, the source by default would be the marketplace. And we are hosting the public marketplace with the images that you can use. They are pretty much plug and play. Of course, you may want to adjust them and give maybe a little bit of memory or add something else, but in general, these are plug and play. Now you have marketplaces listed right here. So you see that by default, OpenNebula Public Marketplace is enabled and contains some amount of images. You can add and host your own marketplace, or you can use something like a recently released community marketplace, right? So that is also possible. Now you can add it and leverage the community marketplace as well. But by default, OpenNebula Public is there and it has a lot of good images that you can run from scratch. That you can run already. Now, obviously, these images are pretty much vanilla. So what you may want to is deploy an image, configure it, and then save it as your custom image. So you may want to add some extra software, you may want to fine tune the sysctl parameters, or you may just simply reconfigure it to suit your needs. So for that, yeah, just deploy, configure, and save it. Now let's go to apps, because apps is the interface how to interact with the OpenNebula marketplace. And let's search for something like Alma Linux, right? So select the Alma Linux 9 and press the import button. Now, when you import, you must pick the name for the template, for an image, and for the virtual machine template. This is another benefit of actually downloading it using the marketplace viewer in the OpenNebula, because you are not only getting an image, but you're also going to get the virtual machine template. And please remember, we're always instantiating from the virtual machine template. So even though if you're not going to use it, it's still a good starting point for your custom virtual machine template. So in case you mess up, you always can fall back to the default one. So that's why, yeah, it's a pretty good idea to keep this toggle enabled. And then select where to place it. So just a brief understanding what means image here, right? So we do have three types of the data stores. We have system data store, we have image data store, and we have files data store. So image data store is where you keep your images at rest, while the system data store, it's where your images will end up when you deploy a virtual machine. Now, when we are downloading an app from the marketplace, you must store it on your image data store. Data stores can be local, data stores can also be shared, but that's already a different topic. Now, if we go to the virtual machine template, you can see that it is already there. If we go to images, it may be already here or may still be in the locked state. So if it's locked, why it's locked? Obviously, virtual machine template is a definition of your virtual machine. That's basically is a bunch of text, while the image itself is a snapshot of a disk. So since it's a snapshot of a disk, it may wait a little bit more than a bunch of text. So that's why it depends on your network speed and your disk speed. You may either get it very fast or you may need to wait for a while. But yeah, initially you would like all your images to be in the ready state, as we have with our Alma Linux 9. Images is not the only thing that we store in In the marketplace, it comes bundled with the virtual machine templates, but also we have such a thing as the service template. So service is the orchestration, is when you deploy a multi-VM application. So the one that involves, let's say, deploying the database server, then you deploy the front end web page, then you also deploy some cache and etc. and etc. So all that will be handled by the service template, and we have some of the service templates there to deploy something like KHS, Kubernetes, or maybe the Mini IO, and so on and so forth. So these have the tag called service template. Whenever you download the service template from the marketplace, you're getting multiple virtual machine templates as well as multiple images. Why? Because VM template may include one image or may include more than one image, right? Because image is a snapshot of a disk. You may have one for the bootable OS and second one to store your data. Now, we already touched the virtual machine template, right? A little bit. So initially, virtual machine template is the set of images, right? And set of virtual networks and set of other parameters that is going to define your future virtual machine. Some settings can be adjusted only by the administrator. And, well, multi-VM deployments, also known as services, are still going to rely on the VM templates. Now, some settings can be adjusted only by the administrator. Yeah, that's true. But once you get your virtual machine deployed, it's fully yours. And considering that you have the right view, as minimum as the user's view selected, then you can reconfigure your virtual machine in the way you wish. Obviously, not like 90% or even 100%, but for 85%, it's truly yours and you can change these things, right? So keep it in mind that as soon as you deploy the VM, the relationship between virtual machine and the virtual machine template is over, right? So it's no longer tied together, which also means that you can delete the virtual machine template if you have VMs running from it. But what you cannot delete an image. If you have at least one image that has active virtual machine using that image, then you cannot delete this image. So this is something to be generally aware of. All your virtual machine templates are stored under the VM templates, and you may create, may clone, may delete these. When you delete these, you can delete along with the images. Obviously, if there is no virtual machine that is currently running and using this image. That's kind of keep in mind. So you have your virtual machine template. You can clone this virtual machine template. And when you clone this virtual machine template, it offers you to clone with images. By default, we're not going to clone with the images because you may have multiple virtual machine templates utilizing the same image, and it's totally fine. So unless you really need to have a separate image for that, you really don't want to clone it with images. But if you do, just mark this checkbox. So let's clone and name it as custom Alpine Linux 3.20 and click the accept. Right, so it's there. Now we can start updating it. Obviously, you can update the original as well, but I tend to keep those originals untouched just in case. These are working templates, so I think it's a good idea to kind of keep them there. If you need a yet another reproduction of a default working template, you can easily go there and clone it. And in fact, they're not consuming a lot of space, right? So they're pretty much lightweight, as these are the bunch of text. Good. Select the custom Alpine Linux, press update, and that's where we can increase the memory, increase the CPU, change, the appearance a little bit of the template. So instead of a Linux, we can select something from the currently available icons. And in fact, obviously, you can download and place any icon to a respective directory and then use it. So for your custom images, you may actually add your own private icon, right? So we also can define how your user will be able to change the memory during the instantiation, right? So when you would like to deploy a virtual machine, you may change the memory. So how we would like to enable it? Should we just say, that it's a fixed value? As we say, it's 256, then it's 256 and no more. Or we would like to add some kind of a list, or we would like to go with the range. So let's say as minimum as 256, as maximum as 248. So then when you're going to instantiate the virtual machine, you will be presented with a slider and you can slide to make sure that you've selected the amount of memory you wish. Then the advanced options, that's where all the fun begins, right? So that's where you could resize your disk. You can attach new disk. You can change the networking and add an alias in case you would like your virtual machine to have a secondary IP address in this on the same virtual network card. So for example, well, 512 megabytes of disk space might be too low, right? So I would like to increase it, right? That's it. Just edit, go to next, and let's say add another 0 to make it 5 gigs instead, right? So that's how you can keep the initial image with some basic settings, right? To be a tiny one. And then when you deploy a VM, it may turn into a bigger image, basically a bigger disk. Now, keep in mind, you can, even after the deployment, you can scale it. You can make it greater. So it's deployed with 5 gigs, you scale it to 10 or 20 or 50. But there is one important thing: you always can scale up, but you cannot go down. So if you deployed with 10, the 10 is your bare minimum. You cannot go with the lower value. So keep it in mind and maybe not allocate the terabytes of a disk space if you don't necessarily need that much. Right, so the network is here, OS and CPU stuff, PCI device pass-through, input and output. That's where you can configure your VNC settings. And I would like specifically to talk about the context. So the contextualization, it's what makes our image so fine-tunable. First thing first, you can provide it with a script. This script will be executed as soon as the virtual machine boots. So on the deployment and on the reboots, obviously. Let's say APK update. Let's do it like that. Then you have the user inputs, right? So the user inputs allow you to prompt the user for a specific set of variables. For example, if you know that your database is going to require the username and the password, you can say db name and then also make it a mandatory or even add the default value. For example, root, right? Why not? And so on. Then you have the context custom variables. So these are pretty much anything that your virtual machine could work with. But also we have a set of predefined variables that are going to fine-tune your virtual machine in a certain way. As the example, let's say username, right? By default, username is always root. Well, I would like to set it to tux, right? So when I deploy, the default username the default user tux is going to get created, and also this is going to be the sudo user, right? Then what else you can do? You can set host name. So this one is going to be the indicator that you would like to change the host name from the local host to something more meaningful. So what you can do here, well, you can either provide something static like VM, then you can extract something dynamic like the username, or additionally, you can extract the virtual machine name in OpenNebula and then set this combination as the host name. What else you can do? You can set time zone here, right? So time zone and something like Europe, Riga. But you can actually do it even better. You can prompt your user to enter this value for you. So let's say time zone right here, type text, default value, let's keep it UTC, but I also would like to make it mandatory. So whenever the user deploys this virtual machine, this user must enter something. But also, if user just wants to do the next finish thingy, then we have the default value called UTC. And the password. Obviously, your password is going to be encrypted, but if you are going to change it, then for time being, it's going to be plain text. As soon as you obviously save it, save the template, you will end up having the virtual, the password encrypted. Good. So let me just remove the DB name for now. Or no, let's keep it. Let's have fun. Let's keep this one, and also let's say DB password and then password 123. So have once again something default. You may also have other types like the list, the number, the floating point, the password. So then it's not going to show in the plain text. For now, I'm fine with the plain text, but once again, you have options there. Right. So let it be like that. Now, another thing, and I would say quite a common mistake might be, is this. So add network contextualization. You would like this to be enabled if you would like your virtual machine to be able to network, right? Because otherwise, it doesn't matter what you set from the virtual network perspective. If this switch is off, you effectively don't have any network. Additionally, you can add any public key to this one if you need to, right? Obviously, what by default is going to take, it is going to take the user's secure shell public key that is enrolled under the settings, but you also can add anything else there, right? So keep this in mind. Good. Some custom variables can be added if you would like to include it in your automation or API calls, yada, yada, yada. But for now, I'm going to leave it as is. Okay. My custom Alpine Linux template is ready to go, right? So now let us instantiate a virtual machine. So virtual machine can be deployed as a single VM or in batches. So you can deploy like 5, 10, 15 virtual machines with the same configuration, right? These virtual machines can be accessed from the Sunstone using the VNC if your firewall is configured properly. For now, we have the mini one installation. So it's basically the hypervisor and the Sunstone both are on the same host. That's why the VNC is not a problem. And then you can back up this VM, you can snapshot the VM, or you can turn the image, the disk, basically into a separate image. And that's what you would like to do if you would really want to have your custom images. Obviously, there is the one apps repository that helps you to do it as the code. But if you just want to have the straightforward possible, the most straightforward way to do it, you would go with just fine tuning a VM and then store it as an image. How to do it? Let's deploy a VM. So select your custom Alpine Linux 3.20 or whatever is yours. Press this button. Now, you can alternatively go to VMs and press create and then select this template. Now, then you are going to be presented with this deployment list. Now, since we are running as one admin, we have more fields right here, but your cloud users, their view is going to be much more limited, right? So if we switch to cloud user, you can see can adjust the virtual CPU, can adjust the memory, but some things are different. For example, we cannot, right? So we cannot deploy it on hold. So if we go as admins, we can start VM in the hold state and then release it manually. So once again, keep in mind that you as an admin, you have a bit more fields accessible than your regular users. Right, so let's deploy 2 VMs and let's name them as Alpine. And then let's do dash and let's call the IDX. So that is going to take the ID within the deployment, right? So the first deployed Alpine Linux in the batch is going to have the ID of 0. The second deployed is going to have the ID of 1. We can increase it to 3 to see how many numbers we are going to get here. Good. Maybe let's increase, if in your case you have more memory, let's increase it to, let's say, 1 gig, right? So that's a little bit over. So let me do it 1024. Right. On the next step, we're now presented with the user inputs. So instead of UTC, I would like to go with Europe Riga. The root username for database, well, it makes no sense at the moment as I don't have any DB there. Let it remain root and let it be password 123, 123, which is fine. We just want it to test the stuff. We actually not configuring any production. So on the next one, you can see that you can again change your virtual machine settings. So you can add more storage, you can add networks, and so on and so forth. We keep it as is. And let's get them deployed. Good. So we have, in my case, I do have 3 virtual machines. They all are deployed on the local host. They all have 1 gig of memory. And they all, as you can see, already have the host name defined here. VM, 1admin, Alpine 0. Yes, why it's like that? Because VM was a static thing. 1admin is the variable, the $u name, and then the $name comes from the name of this virtual machine. Good. If I will press refresh, I can see that my virtual machines are running, right? So these are running and probably they do something in the background, obviously, but at least they were deployed and allocated to a certain host. What else I can find here? I can find the IP address. So if I would like to connect via the secure shell and this IP is reachable to me, then I can use it. Otherwise, welcome to the VNC. So click the button and here you go. You can establish the VNC connection. So the username was Tux and the password was OpenNebula. As you can see, I am right here. Good. What's the date? The date is Wednesday, September 10th, and then close to 7 p.m. Eastern European time zone. That is my time zone, in fact. So as you can see, the setting was translated correctly. Now, if you have permissions or view a little bit above the cloud user, let's say as the user, you can go to configuration of the VM, right? And press update the VM configuration. So you can reconfigure in case you forgot. You can reconfigure and set a different password, right? If you wish. Then you can set a different time zone, and then you also can set different variables. Also, you can change the secure shell public key and enroll something else, and you can change the start script, right? So it's APK update. However, you can set anything else, right? As, for example, it could be outputting the environment variables. So once you save those settings, the specific procedure will kick in, and we are going to reconfigure the VM according to your configuration. So it is very helpful. But please note, if you're running the cloud user view, you pretty much have no access there. Well, what else you can do with a running VM? Well, as I mentioned, you can snapshot it. So you can take a snapshot and you'll get the full snapshot of a virtual machine. Please note that reverting the snapshot, you need to have your virtual machine running. Then you have storage, access to storage, and you can save your image as an image that you could later use with other virtual machine templates. You can take a snapshot of a disk, or you can resize the disk. Please note, in order to recover this snapshot of a disk, the VM must be powered down. Why it's like that? Well, imagine you have running a database, and the application is constantly placing some stuff there, and then you start to reverting the disk to a previous state. This may end up pretty bad, so you don't want to have it. That's why, in order to a specific icon to appear, what you need to do, you need to power down the VM. So go to VM state, and place power off. Obviously, that you would do in production, but since it's a test environment, it's pretty safe to just power off hard and don't do anything gracefully here, right? So you go to storage. Now you can see this awesome icon and you can revert back, right? So keep in mind, full VM backup, full VM snapshot, running VM, revert the full VM snapshot, running VM. Take a snapshot of a disk, running VM or stopped VM, revert the snapshot of a disk. Your VM must be powered down. Good. And then you can take and wipe out your virtual machines. And I would like to advertise our command line. So OpenNebula has pretty extensive command line, and sometimes some tasks are faster in the command line. So it comes bundled with OpenNebula deployment on the front end. So what you can do is just one VM list, and you get your virtual machines, one host list, and you get a set of your KVM host, and then also you can control it from here. For example, one host, disable host with the ID 0. And this one is going to effectively disable the host. Right. So these are the basic operations. Obviously, we have much, much, much more to talk about. And we have a specific webinars covering some specific aspects of OpenNebula. We do have trainings. We do have product webinars. So there is actually a lot happening aside of these training webinars. And then obviously we do have documentation and awesome community. So you can check out the forum. If you have any issues, the forum might already have it resolved. Or if you have any issues, then you can ask the community for help. Alternatively, you also can have the support from OpenNebula. So if you happen to run it at the enterprise level, you may want to have a support by our very, very awesome engineers. And now I'm going to go through the comment section and we'll have a look for the questions. Yeah, we have question from the Nurlan. So the host is pretty much a Linux machine, right? So all of these limitations, they would come from your Linux system rather than OpenNebula. So OpenNebula is not enforcing any limitations. That's why keep in mind it's pretty much depends on what your Linux system can handle. I hope I've answered this question the way you've expected. Do we have any other questions? That is the perfect time to ask these. Right. Um, Pretty understandable. It's September. We're still in the summer mood, even though it's already September, but still, it's not that far. So thanks for attending. I hope you had an informative time with me. As I said, again, sign up for other webinars. We do have them pretty much regularly. Um, Sign up for my trainings. I'll be happy to deliver one for you. Also, we do have public trainings. So, yeah, keep in touch with that as well. And see you again soon. Have a great reminder of the day. Bye bye.